produce some reports that people had detected subtle energy with instruments. Well, I completely failed, to cut it short, and what was I left with? Well, dowsing, of course. So at one stage, I, of course, knew about Wilhelm Reich's work and the Orgone Accumulator and all that. And then I read about these people making this material called orgonite, which is just metal particles set in a non-conductive matrix, such as wax or resin or something like that. So I then made this object, which is not only orgonite, but it also has geometric qualities based on golden section. The cats obviously enjoy it. Well, I made this. I wasn't a dowser, but I was speaking with Jim Lyons, who's already been mentioned, and he said, "Why don't you dowse it?" And he told me, just get a couple of dowsing rods and walk towards it, and you'll probably find that these will cross and uncross, and then cross and uncross, and finally cross over the source. And he also suggested that perhaps to measure the radius of the dowsable ring closest to the source, this might relate to the energy of the source. So that led to the method that I'm using all the time. I measure the radius of this innermost dowsable ring. So what are these rings? And here Jim put me in touch with the work of the physicist Milo Wolf. And he says there's no such thing as a particle. It's all waves, you see. And this is his model of an electron, for example. And there will be rings or spherical rings, spherical shells all around it, which are in fact, he says, standing waves in the zero-point energy. Well, Jim said those rings we detect around a source of subtle energy are probably the very same phenomenon on an enormously larger scale. Well, I've worked with some other kinds of sources. Here's a wooden pyramid. I also have electrical sources, which I'll use later. And here's a test of the quantitative nature of the method. I just charged water in the pyramid, measured out different volumes, and dowsed the radius of this innermost ring. You can see we have a pretty linear relationship. Well, being a scientist, I want to talk to other scientists, and most of them don't believe in dowsing. So I need some objective backup. And the easiest thing to do is ultraviolet spectroscopy. And some people have obtained results with that, particularly Glenn Ryan many years ago. So I charge some water like this. This is the one in the little one is the orgonite, a very small piece of orgonite. And I put this next to water for half an hour or so. And then I took these water samples down to University of Bath, where a very kind Italian girl named Ilaria offered to run these samples on the spectrophotometer. And we had absolutely brilliant results, very, very clear difference between the charged water and controlled water. Well, now I've used this material Ormus quite a lot, so I will have to introduce it. It really annoys me that so few people know about it. Some of you know, of course, but I'll have to introduce it. It was, the word is derived from the original title that David Hudson gave it, orbitally rearranged monatomic elements. And he found this material which did not have any chemical reactions and had no conventional spectroscopic signature. So that's why nobody suspected this stuff existed. And he also found that it's mainly precious metals, but of course, being the electrons are whizzing around in a different way, so they're not poisonous, there's no chemical reactions. They're repelled by magnetic fields, which is a characteristic of superconductivity, and they're everywhere, in living bodies, in water, in soil, even in the air. But I think we're all a bit short of them, perhaps because they've got washed into the sea during the life of the Earth. And seawater is extremely rich, especially dead sea water. So finally there's they do, although not a conventional chemical reaction, they do have some binding to alkali metals, especially magnesium. And that explains how the method I use to concentrate it from seawater, how it works. That you just add caustic soda, and when it's very alkaline, you get a white precipitate, which will be mainly magnesium hydroxide. And you just collect this precipitate. That's it. My wife and I take it every day. We use it in the garden. Has wonderful life-enhancing properties. I hope I'm going to live a very long time with this. Anyway, these are just some amazing vegetables I've grown in my garden. And this one's very big. It was quite tasty too. Well, at one point, I made what I call a serendipitous mistake. I wanted to dissolve this white precipitate, and I had plenty of hydrochloric acid. But for some reason, my hand went up to the shelf to a small bottle of phosphoric acid. I added that, and it didn't really dissolve, but it turned it into a very heavy crystalline precipitate, which now dowsed much stronger than the original white precipitate. So here's some factors affecting dowsable energy. There's, strangely enough, the Dead Sea salt crystals, although having lots of Ormus, do not dowse hardly at all. After I take a solution of Dead Sea salt and add solid magnesium phosphate, the dowsable energy rises quickly in a few minutes. And then later I tried to take this magnesium phosphate with Ormus in it and put it into orgonite, and it would rise even higher. My theory is that somehow the Ormus atoms, as they go into the crystals of magnesium phosphate, they align themselves to form a boson-Stein condensate, and thus you have quantum coherence, a quantum hole. And I think basically what I'm dowsing is quantum coherence. And of course, a living being is quantum coherent. Well, here's just some, this is actually a result of a lot of amazed me, I must say, that I had some Ormus magnesium phosphate in the pink one, and a small piece of orgonite in the light blue separately, dowsed separately. When I put them together, it went up enormously. And I did that, dowsed that at different times of day, and it takes more or less the same trajectory during the day that an ordinary piece of orgonite did in the dark blue one. And that tells me that this trajectory of orgonite tells me that there's a lot of orgone coming from the sun, which I think Wilhelm Reich also thought. And orgonite is not a source in itself, it merely accumulates subtle energies. Well, this is by the way, really, because of the intense affinity of magnesium phosphate for Ormus, I thought it might be able to make a demonstration of the ability of Ormus atoms to quantum tunnel through solid barriers. So I set up this one where the beaker contains a strong solution of Dead Sea salt, and the tube has magnesium phosphate, and I just dowse this at intervals, and you can see, of course, to begin with, no dowsable energy. But after about 7 hours, it reaches a peak, and then for some reason goes down a bit. I don't know why. Now, one of the main things I want to talk about is, I'm going to watch my watch, I suppose. The main thing I want to talk about is the non-local transfer of dowsable energy. Now, this idea came to me on reading, on encountering the website of an Austrian American called Carl Wells, and he makes these radionic devices based on orgonite. He has a piece of orgonite, and then he will put the witness on the orgonite or close to it, and then with his healing intention, he says the orgonite makes better transmission of the healing intention. Now, of course, the witness is a sort of an informational link, linked with the person to be healed. And of course, the more similar it is to the person, to the target, the better. So if you have just a piece of a ring from somebody, for example, it's not very good, or signatures might be fairly good. A piece of hair is better, maybe blood is even better still. I don't know. But it depends on the similarity and uniqueness of the link. It mustn't be something that's commonly exists all over the universe. So he puts his logo on his website, and he invites people to download this and feel the energy from the screen. Well, my hands are not like John Caddy's. I couldn't feel this energy. But I downloaded the logo and printed it off and dowsed it. Sure enough, the energy is there. So I then did a number of experiments with images on paper. And here's Carl Wells' logo down at the corner there. I then made a random glyph with just an ink, and on the right-hand corner, the orb. This was an image I made in an attempt to make something really unique, as no image like that in the universe, not exactly like that anyway. So I put one of these images, for example the glyph, under some orgonite, and I dowsed the other at 35 meters, and I got this radius 64. Another similar glyph I just scribbled, not much different. Even the black square was not that much different, but the 5 green spots did not obtain entanglement, which shows me that white paper is not enough. There's plenty of white paper in the universe, of course. It's got to be unique. So the glyph did not transmit to the orb, but the orb to the orb seems to be the best entanglement. And so I've used this orb image in all subsequent work. I also tried with samples of human hair. In this case, I didn't expect a very big energy, and indeed it's only in the region of 40 inches, not very big. And I put one sample of hair, my hair, for example, and I dowsed another sample of my hair at 30 meters distant. And because I didn't expect very big differences, I dowsed several times, so one can almost get a standard deviation from this. So here's my hair, RT to RT is this. RT to Mr. X. I got Mr. X's hair from the barbershop floor. It's much the same. But Mr. X to Mr. X, I think, is significantly better. And that may be that he was a young man, had more DNA in his hair, perhaps. Well, Carl Welz's logo gave the opportunity to do this experiment, where I just dowsed it at different times of day and compared the curve for the logo in red with the curve for a piece of orgonite on the same day. This was done on the same day. And you can see that my orgonite rises to a maximum just after midday, but the logo is considerably later, perhaps when the sun is high in the eastern United States, where he is. Since I found that the energy can be transmitted non-locally between two identical images, it suggested I really wanted to know whether information could also be so transmitted. So I made use of the Ormus. This is where the Ormus really came in. I made use of the discovery that Ormus going into magnesium phosphate raises a very high dowsable energy. And I thought maybe during the time that the Ormus atoms are going into these crystals, they can be imprinted with information, any information that's around. And they will then hopefully store the information and emit it, continually emit it with the subtle energy they're giving off. So this kind of experiment is what I did. It's a bit complicated, I suppose, but basically I wanted to do it with frequency information. And the frequencies are applied from a signal generator, which is connected to two metal plates. Between these plates there's a flat piece of orgonite, and around them is one of my images. And at the receiving end, there's another image. This is not so far away. It's a distant room, 15 meters. And there's a flask with dead sea salt solution. After switching on the signal generator, I put some magnesium phosphate in the flask and leave it 15 minutes or so. And then I filter off the magnesium phosphate, wash it, and sent it to my colleague Dr. Cyril Smith. And Cyril Smith has developed an extraordinary skill in dowsing frequencies. So in the next, I sent him several samples, but this result really impressed me. This particular sample of Ormus magnesium phosphate has been imprinted with 5 different frequencies. And Cyril Smith dowsed these blind. I didn't tell him what it was at all. It could have been nothing. And you can see there's an amazing correspondence between the frequency applied and the frequency he dowsed. Well, I think this could be, we're doing quite well. This could form a technology for distant healing, a sort of a modification of radionic technology. Do away with all these radionic instruments and just use almost magnesium phosphate. So the idea was that, and I have done this, or I've used my tame healer to do it. So you have the photograph or a piece of hair or something, a witness from the person to be healed. And the healer would focus on this photograph. In this case, you might recognize it's Taylor de Chardin, who does not need healing, I have to say. But I just happen to have that photograph. He's one of my heroes, you see, so I took it off the wall. And while the healer is focusing on healing energy on the photograph, he or she would put
microphone, please.
What?
Microphone.
Would put the. Is it off?
On.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Would put the magnesium phosphate into the Dead Sea salt solution, and send it back to me, and I take this magnesium phosphate and put it into a piece of orgonite, and here's the radionic treatment, you see. The orgonite with all this magnesium phosphate doing the healing. So we have done a few people like that. I wouldn't say it's a clinical trial, certainly not double-blind. Now the last but one bit is the question, could there be an entropic form of such energy? This is perhaps the most controversial and, to me, the most interesting bit of what I'm doing at the moment. An entropic form, you might call it an anti-life energy. Could there be such a thing? And I was well aware that Wilhelm Reich one day thought, let's try putting radioactivity in the Orgone Accumulator. So he put it in, and after a bit, people began to fall sick in his laboratory. And he thought, this is a big problem. He took it out again, and it took quite a long time for the accumulator to sort of settle down again. So he called this radiation dangerous orgone radiation, DOR, or what I'll call DOR. Well, I began to think of this when I became aware of this conspiracy story that maybe stuff is being sprayed from aeroplanes into the upper atmosphere. I can't mention this to anyone at home, they won't believe it, but I was very skeptical, but now I do believe it. And there's a lot on the internet, it's called chemtrails. And the idea is that perhaps they're doing this to combat global warming, to reflect the sun's rays. And people in America have taken rain, samples of rain and snow, and sent them for chemical analysis. And sometimes they find very high levels of aluminium and barium. And then they've also looked up the patent records. There are many, many patents for different kinds of geoengineering. And some of these are exactly that, to put aluminium and barium into the upper atmosphere. Nobody's telling us, so it's just a conspiracy story. Well, I thought this might be going on at home, and I did notice that water which had been charged in my pyramid, which normally keeps its charge many days or weeks even, this was losing its charge in a matter of hours. And I thought, this is really odd, and I wondered whether perhaps the sun's Orgone energy is coming through this aluminium layer and is turning it into dangerous Orgone radiation, which is discharging water. Life energy charges water, maybe discharges water. And what was I going to say? Anyway, I'll move on to the next one. Yes, here's what made me suspect that chemtrails were going on. Not only seeing them in the sky, but of course that wasn't enough, but I was taking readings from a simple small piece of orgonite very frequently. And at one time it began to behave very strangely, especially on this particular day when I took readings very frequently during the day. And the energy was going up and down, up and down, up and down. And yet the next day it was more or less normal. So I thought this is very, very odd. And so, yes, as I said, these strange periods, charged water is losing its charge. Oh yes, I was going to say the connection with aluminium, you have to think of the Russian torsion field work, where they have shown that aluminium is a very, very unusual metal in that it blocks torsion fields. It's unusual in other ways as well. It can actually be charged, but never mind, that's something more recent. So we've already dealt with the rest. So I then set up an experiment to test whether I could reproduce this dangerous Orgone radiation. And instead of putting aluminium up in the air, I just had a solution of an aluminium salt atom. And I wanted to show that it was a subtle energy rather than just electromagnetic. So I tried to transmit it by entanglement between a pair of images. So as the source this time, I'm using an electrical source. This is a scalar field antenna or coil. As you perhaps know, when you have two self-cancelling coils, they create what's called a scalar field, which is a subtle energy field. And this will charge water very well. I pulsed it with 10 kilohertz. But in order to create a door, I had on top of the scalar field antenna, I had a pan of 1% alum solution. Not an aluminium pan, of course, stainless steel. And on top of that, one of my images. And then in a distant room, I had the receiving image surrounding another pan of stainless steel containing water charged in a pyramid. So I dowsed this water at frequent intervals and was amazed how the energy declined to nothing in a few minutes. In minutes it was discharged. Whereas in the control experiment where I had sodium chloride instead of alum, there was hardly any change. Well, finally we come to another means of objective testing. Unfortunately, although this the area in Bath University was very kind, they wouldn't let me bring any more samples. Obviously, this kind of work did not appeal to their industrial funding agents. So I had to think of another way to get objective results. And so I turned to growth of seedlings. Of course, Reich has done that, James the Mayo has done it. It's a rather long-term business. You let the little seedlings grow, and then you have to measure the lengths of each seed. So I thought I might be able to develop a quicker method. So this is what I did. I had, on the left is the scalar antenna and sending image. And in the distant room, the incubator, the seedlings are in an incubator with the receiving image. And the seedlings are actually put out on plastic grids. So I can take these grids out and weigh them every day. And so I get the response by the increase in weight of the seeds. So here's a few growth curves, and you can see that even at 2 days, there's quite a reasonable increase in weight. So in order to get some statistical results, I concentrated on the day 2 results. So here's with the remote scalar field. And you can see that although I've only done, well, it's actually 6 experiments, so it does take some time. But with the remote scalar field, it's higher than control, and it's more or less significant. I still have to do more of those and get a higher significance, you know, to make it more impressive. But now we have the one where we have the remote scalar field through alum solution. This is the effect of my self-created door. And the seedlings now grow significantly less.
We're out of time.
Is what?
Out of time.
Out of time.
Out of time, oh, okay. Yeah. Time for just the conclusions?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, Orgone is a cohering or syntropic field. It's emitted by quantum coherent sources, natural and artificial. Dor is a decohering or entropic, or sometimes I like to call it a chaotropic field. Both can be transmitted non-locally, and Orgone can be imprinted with information, and this can also be transmitted non-locally. Thank you.
We have a coffee break in the next room.